On behalf of the Belgian Prison Administration, a warm welcome as well as this webinar on the management of prison capacity. Prison capacity in Belgium equals prison overcrowding. Therefore, that's the reason of the title for the title of my presentation. Overcrowded prisons is not a new problem. One could even say it was created along with prisons themselves. Let's take a Belgian law, for example, the so-called Lejeune Act that was adopted in 1888. This law made it possible for convicts to be released from prison after 1/3 of their sentence. The will to give convicts a perspective that they could regain their freedom sooner as they showed a correcter behavior in prison was certainly there, but already then the overcrowding aspect was also an additional justification for voting this law. In fact, therefore, the overpopulation phenomenon has never really been a crisis phenomenon, but is more akin to a chronic illness. Crisis phenomena require crisis measures, solutions that mitigate the worst suffering in the short term, but which must be followed by structural measures that help to prevent future similar crises. What we observe, however, is that such a preventive approach has hardly been realized. Rather, what emerged was an acceptance of a certain level of overpopulation as the new normal, to paraphrase a concept from the COVID pandemic. And then, when overpopulation did reach higher peaks, the policy kept falling back on temporary emergency measures. Before I move on, I'll pass some data about the Belgian correctional services. You see a map of our country with all the prisons at our present. We have 17 prisons in the northern part, the Dutch-speaking part of Belgium in Flanders, one in Brussels, in the capital, and soon we will have a second one over there. And we have 16 prisons in Wallonia, in the French-speaking part of the country. In Flanders, we have, in the meantime, two rarities, which I will talk about later on, that what we call transition houses and detention houses. These are two small-scale facilities. The first kind, transition houses, have a capacity limited to 15 convicts. Detention houses have a capacity between 20 and 60 convicts. As we speak, we have a global capacity of 9,736 places with a population of 11,016 inmates. So the overcrowding percentage is 40% average. It varies from one prison to another. Some of our prisons have 0% overcrowding. Some of them have over 50% overcrowding. In this population, about 60% of the inmates are convicted and 35% on remand. 5% are mentally ill. These persons are not convicted to prison sentence, but to mandatory psychiatric treatment inside our prisons. And 4% of our population is female. If we compare our numbers with on the European level, we see that we have on one kind, in terms of prison population, we score under the European average. In terms of overcrowding, we score significantly worse. You will see two statistics which clarify it more visually, where there's a flash, that's where Belgium situates itself in the prison population rate, and here in the overcrowding rate. So that visualizes what I just said. Prison overcrowding, what's in a name? It's not a neutral concept. It implies that there are too many inmates in our prisons, but it can equally well mean that there is too little capacity for all these inmates. nor is it a value-neutral concept in the sense that not everyone considers the mismatch between the number of inmates and the number of available places as problematic. They consider the burden of it as a part of the retribution that the people want to inflict on punished persons. To say it otherwise, imprisonment as a sanction as well as for sanctioning. Why do they dare to complain about it? They shouldn't have committed a crime, then they would not have ended up here. This ambivalence between reductionism on the one hand, or the will to reduce the number of inmates, and expansionism on the other, focusing mainly on additional prison capacity, has led to indecision for too long. And up to this day, the politics move on both fronts, taking both measures to create more places, as well as taking measures to reduce the prison population. Examples of expansionist techniques in Belgium include construction of additional prisons, strengthening prison sanctions on some offenses, principally on sexual offenses, and also optimizing capacity management. The latter is somewhat ambiguous. On the one hand, it is about techniques to classify inmates more selectively so they would suffer less from the overcrowding phenomena. However, it's also an opportunity in the sense that it has given inspiration to innovation in prison construction and more specifically, the creation of small-scale prison concepts. We are in Belgium on the start of that evolution that we will focus to create a number of small-scale prisons, as I said, with a capacity between 20 and 60 places, very low security, a great porosity to the society, and where it will be much easier to give a lot of autonomy to the inmates and to facilitate as the regime as well as the offers on different services, counseling, and also that. Examples of reductionist techniques are deciding measures that reduce the number of inmates in a short term, but limited in time. In that context, measures were taken that we also used during the pandemic. Early release, extended penitentiary relief, sentence suspension are the most important examples. Our minister is also studying the possibility of no longer punishing certain crimes with imprisonment, the so-called decriminalization and depenalization of certain actual defined crimes. We also work on shortening the length of stay in prison to ensure that convicts can be released closer to the eligibility date. As I said in the beginning, we have a law, it's not anymore the law of 1888, but our latest act that fixes the release conditions for inmates has also the 1/3 in its articles. I deliberately do not mention alternatives to imprisonment because the common thread since the introduction of alternatives for imprisonment is that the prison population has continued to grow undiminished, probably due to another well-known phenomena called net widening. We are convinced that there is no miracle solution to a problem as old as prison overcrowding, and I suppose that the contributions that will follow will not pretend either to provide a conclusive answer to it. However, they do focus on how to manage a prison population that may or not may be larger than the prison capacity. I kindly give them the floor.
Thank you so much, Rudy.